Hey guys, welcome to the Beginner's Guide to FL Studio. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to all the major windows and features of FL Studio that you'll be spending most of your time in, and I'll also help you get set up for the first time. If you're new to producing or new to digital audio workstations in general, this video is perfect for you. So let's get started. If you're firing up FL Studio for the first time, you'll want to make sure that you have the right audio interface configured. So let's do that. Let's go to Options, Audio Settings, and in this device drop-down list, if you have an external sound card, you'll see it down here under ASIO devices. I use the Native Instruments Complete Audio 6, so I use this when I produce. If you have no dedicated sound card, you'll want to use either the ASIO for All or the FL Studio ASIO driver. And what ASIO is basically a driver that lets the application communicate directly with your audio interface. Since I'm recording this video for YouTube, I'm using this Voicemeeter Virtual ASIO driver, so don't worry about that. But like I said, I use the Complete Audio 6 when I produce. So with that, let's get started. The first thing I want to show you is the channel rack. So I'm going to press F6 to bring that up. The channel rack is where you construct what are called patterns in FL Studio, and you can think of patterns as kind of like the building blocks of your track. So what's going on here? So these four things here are samples that FL Studio has included in their default template. So if you click on these, you can see a nice waveform, the file name, and a whole bunch of other advanced things that we'll cover in later videos. But for now, just know that these four things here are samples. And if you click on the waveform, you can get a preview of each one. So let's create our first pattern. What I'm going to do is left click in the step sequencer to place a sample. And now I'm going to hit spacebar to play it back. If you hit spacebar and you don't hear anything, it's probably because you're in song mode. So just come up here to this thing and click it. I don't know, whatever that's called, the thingy thing. And make sure that it's highlighted so that you're in pattern mode. You can right click to delete a step. Or right click and drag to delete a whole bunch of steps at once. Let's add a few more instruments into the mix. Oh yeah. Alright, let's talk about the mixer. The mixer is where you mix all of your sounds together and make sure that all the levels are balanced so things aren't too quiet, aren't too loud, and so on. The other use case for the mixer is to apply effects to each channel. So let me show you the mixer now. So I'm going to hit F9 to bring it up. And what we have here are a total of 99 plus 4, so 103 total mixer tracks that you have at your disposal. So by default, FL Studio in the template that we're using, which is the basic with limiter template, it will route these four samples to the first four mixer tracks, and that's what these numbers correspond to. So for example, kick is routed to insert 1, clap is routed to insert 2, and the hat is routed to insert 3, and the snare to insert 4. So when I play this back with the mixer open, you'll see these channels light up. So there are a couple of ways to route samples to different tracks, and the first way is to just move this slider up and down. And as you can see, you can have multiple samples or instruments on the same mixer track. Another way to route samples to the mixer is to click on the sample and do the same thing up here, or highlighting the sample or sound source and coming down to the mixer and right clicking on the channel, go to channel routing, and then route selected channels to this track. Now, the cool thing is when you do that, it automatically names the mixer track after the sound source that you have routed to it. So I'm going to do that for the clap, the hat, and one more way, which I'll show you with the snare, is if it's already on a track, just hit this little track button and it'll automatically name that for you. Let's add the snare so we're using all the instruments. So to change the levels of a track, simply come down to the mixer and use this fader for whichever track you want to modify the volume for. So I'm going to play this back and I'm going to turn down the clap. To reset a control to its default value, just right click on it and hit reset. If you want to change multiple tracks volumes at once, simply double click and drag to select multiple mixer tracks, and then you can modify their levels simultaneously. Another thing the mixer allows you to do is what's called busing. Now, what's happening here by default is each of these individual sound sources are routed to their respective inserts in the mixer, and then they're routed through the master bus. And the master bus is the final mixer track before it comes to your ears. So by default, everything is going through the master. You can take an instrument off the master, like so, and now when I play it back, you won't hear this clap. As you can see, the signal is still coming through because the sample is being triggered up here in the step sequencer, but the audio from this track is not going anywhere. So one thing we can do with this audio is route it to a separate mixer track, and then through this one, now insert 5, go out to the master. So now when the clap comes through, you'll see it light up here, and you'll see insert 5 light up. And what I'm going to do is actually mute all the other sound sources so you can just hear the clap. So as you can see, the sound source is coming through the clap, down into insert 2, up through insert 5, and then finally out to master. So why do this? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, if you only want to use one fader to control the levels of multiple different channels, this is a great way to do that. Another reason would be to add an effect that applies to a whole bunch of inserts at once. So for example, one thing I like to do is create a percussion bus. So I'm going to come over here and hit F2 on insert 5 to rename it. I'm going to call this percussion. And since the clap is already routed there, I'm going to go ahead and route the hat and the snare, and I'm going to take them off the master. So now the clap, the hat, and the snare are all going through this percussion bus here. So if I play back the clip, you'll see the percussion bus light up now every time each one of these gets triggered up here. So now instead of doing this to change the levels, I can do this. And so what I'm going to do is when I play this back, I'm going to turn down this percussion bus, and you'll see that the clap, the hat, and the snare are going to go down in volume, and the kick is going to remain constant. Say you want to switch out one of these samples for a different sample, or add a new sample to the pattern. Now's a great time to introduce you to the browser, which will let you do that very easily. Actually, let me close these just so it's a little cleaner. So by default, when you open FL Studio, the browser is going to be on the left side of the screen. I like to keep mine up here where it's minimized, and so when I need it, I just go up here, double click, and it opens up for me. And the browser basically gives you access to some settings like current project things that you can change, plugin database, presets, and a whole bunch of folders that FL Studio has added by default, including this packs folder where I believe these default samples come from. So let's drill down into this folder and find a sample that we can replace our hi-hat with. So let's go into drums, let's click on hats, and here's a list of samples that are in the hats folder. So when I click on one of these, it's gonna preview that sample for us. Now what's happening is when you're playing a sample through the browser, it's actually playing through a particular mixer track, and that is set in the options. Let me show you that real quick. Preview mixer track is set to 99. So when I scroll over and show you mixer number 99, you'll see that when I audition a sample, it's going to play through that insert. So one thing I can do is if I want my samples to be a little quieter when played through the browser, I can just turn on this mixer track and it'll let me do that. Alright, let's replace this hat. I'm going to audition a few of these and see which one I like, and when I'm happy with it, I'm going to drag it right on top of this hat to replace it. So now, let's play back our sample. So that is basically how you replace a sample in your pattern. If you want to add a new one, what you do is you click and you drag it below and not overwriting one of the existing ones. So when you do overwrite, you'll see there's a green box that highlights the sample that you'd be overwriting. If you just move it down here right below to where it's not highlighting, it'll add that in as a new sample. And as you can see, by default, it's not routed to any insert track, so this is going to go straight out to master. So one of the first things you'll want to do when you're adding a new sample is to put it on its own insert. So I'm going to put it on 6. Or again, you can right click channel routing, route selected channels to this track, and now this is going through insert 6 out to master. If I want to put this on the percussion bus that we created earlier, I'm just going to click on it and take it off of master, click on percussion, and boom, there we go. Another thing is to move mixer tracks on the mixer. If you have it selected, hold Alt and then use the arrow keys to move left and right. So I'm going to hold Alt and move it 1 left. So now my percussion bus is after all the samples. And actually, let's replace this open hat with a closed one and add it in. Now, as you'll notice, when I replaced the sample with the 707CH, it renamed it here, but it did not rename the mixer track. So if you want to do that, you can just go ahead and rename this CH for closed hat, and the shortcut again for that is F2. And one more thing about the browser, if you have your own sample folder that you'd like to add, like I have here, you can do that in the options. So go to options, file settings, and right here under the browser extra search folders, look for a blank box and just hit this folder icon next to it and point it to your samples folder. And once that's done, it should show up here in the browser, and you should be able to browse that directory and look at all your lovely samples for use in production. In addition to samples, there are a couple other sound sources within FL Studio. There's plugins or VSTs, and there's also live input. Let's talk about plugins for a second. Now, there are 2 types of plugins in FL Studio. There are generator plugins, which generate sound, and there are effect plugins, which affect sound. To access the generator plugins, you can click this plus icon here, and this will show you all the generator plugins that you have installed within FL Studio. To access your effect plugins, you go down to your mixer, and these 10 slots here are your effect slots. When you click on one of those, you can see the entire list of all the effect plugins that you have installed. The most common type of generator plugin is a synthesizer. So let's go ahead and add one of those. I'm going to choose one of my favorites, Serum. So now we've added a new channel to our rack, and it's a synthesizer or generator plugin. And I'm just going to go through here and find a preset that we can use in this track, something simple. Maybe something like this. That's cool. So once again, we've added a new channel to our rack, so let's go ahead and assign it to its own mixer track. So I'm going to come down here to insert 7, right click, go to channel routing, route selected channels to this track. Now let me introduce you to another new window, and this is where we're going to draw in the notes for our synthesizer plugin. And this is called the piano roll. And you get to the piano roll by right clicking on a sound source and hitting piano roll. So the piano roll lets you basically draw your melodies, draw your notes, etc. for whichever sound source you have selected. So let's go ahead and program in a few notes here. See what that sounds like. The piano roll can also be used on your sampler channels. So let's open up our closed hat, and I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to change the velocity of or volume of every other note. So I'm going to turn every other note down a little bit. And another thing I'm going to do is switch over to the panning, and I'm going to pan every other one left and right. So if we go 50% right, 50% left. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but a really helpful tip is if you'll notice up in the top left, this area right here, this is your hint bar, and this will show you exactly what's going on wherever your mouse cursor is. So like if you're highlighting over certain UI components, it'll explain what those are. Down here, for example, it shows me that where my mouse cursor is, I'm panning 50% to the right. Down here is 50% to the left. So just keep that in mind when you're using FL Studio. That's a very helpful place to look when you're modifying things. So I'm just going to pan these all 50% left and right. Whoops, skipped one. And let's see what this all sounds like. Now, it might be hard for you to actually hear the panning and volume changes on the closed hat, so let me solo that real quick and show you how to do that. So if you right click on this mute button and hit solo, this will solo this track, so only the 707CH sample will be coming through. And as you can see and hear, it's panning left and right for every other channel, and the volume changes are happening. A visual representation of the panning can be seen down here in the mixer track. So when it goes to the right, you'll see the right side light up more. When it goes to the left, you'll see the left side light up more. So far we've talked about the channel rack, the mixer, the browser, plugins, and the final area that I'm going to show you of FL Studio where you'll be spending a lot of time in is the playlist. Now, the playlist is probably one of the first things that you saw when you opened up FL Studio for the first time. It's usually the biggest window, and it's that for a reason. The playlist is where you structure and organize your track. There are basically three types of inputs that the playlist uses. One is patterns, which we've talked a great deal about. The other is samples as audio, and the third are automation clips. So let's talk about patterns in the playlist just for a second. So far we've got one pattern, and it's got all our instruments on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the open hi-hat and I'm going to put that on its own pattern. So what I did was I right clicked on it and I went to cut, and I basically cut all the clips from this pattern on that channel. And I'm going to create a new pattern, so pattern 2, and I'm going to call this one OH for open hat. And I'm going to right click on the same channel and hit paste, and it's just going to paste the things that I cut from pattern 1. So now we've got two patterns. We've got pattern 1 with all the instruments but the open hat, and then pattern 2 with just the open hat. So what I can do now is, with pattern 1 selected, I can come into the playlist and just paste that in here as many times as I want and layer that into the playlist view. Then I can come over and click on the second pattern, the open hat pattern, and paste that in. So now we're still in pattern mode for playback. So right now if I hit play, we're going to hear pattern 2, which is the open hat. So that sounds like this. If I switch to song mode and hit play, what's going to happen is it's going to play the sequence that I've laid out here. Let's take a listen. And as you can see, it loops indefinitely forever, hence the name Fruity Loops. So that's patterns in the playlist. Let's talk about the second one that I mentioned, which is samples as audio. So what we've done so far is we've created a couple of patterns which use samples in them. And another way to get samples in your project is to simply drag them directly into your playlist view. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to open up the browser and I'm going to find a crash cymbal that I want to use. And I'm just going to select it here and then drag it right into the playlist to the position that I want it in. Now, as you can see, what it's done is it's created what's called an audio clip in my playlist view. Now, if you'll notice, we have the samples here in our channel rack that are audio clips as well. So basically, these are essentially the same thing with just a different form they're manifested in. These are channels in a channel rack, and this crash sample is an audio sample directly in the playlist. And so once again, we've got a new sound source in our project. So let's go ahead and assign this to the mixer. And I'm going to actually show you yet another way to do so. If you come over here, double click on the sample, bring up its properties. If you click on this arrow in the top left corner and go to assign free mixer track, or shortcut Control L, that will find the next available insert and assign this track to it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on this and hit Control L. And as you can see, it assigned it to insert 8 and it automatically named it for us. So let's do something new with this crash. Let's add an effect to it. One of my favorite things to do with a crash cymbal is to add a delay effect. So I'm going to come over here to the mixer, go to slot 1, and I'm going to choose Fruity Delay Bank. And I'm just going to tweak some of these settings to my liking really quickly. And I'm just going to turn it down a little bit because I think crashes are naturally pretty loud. So now when I play it back, actually let's play it without the delay. So I'm going to go over here and just turn it off. So now let's just hear what the crash sounds like. So that's the crash without the delay. And let's go ahead and turn it on. And let me just scale this back a little bit. So now when I start playback, it's when the crash hits, you'll hear the delay effect right after it. So back to the playlist. The third input type that I mentioned was a automation clip. So what the hell is an automation clip? An automation clip is basically a way for you to tell FL Studio, hey, I want you to modulate or change the value of something during the course of the playback of this track. So for example, what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and automate the volume of the kick drum so that it sort of fades out of the track as it plays on. So I'm just going to put more of these pattern ones and our open hat pattern here. And what I'm going to do next is hold Control and then select the region that I want the automation clip to apply to. So I'm going to just select Control here, actually here to here. And so this tells FL Studio, okay, whatever I do next as far as creating an automation clip, only apply it to this region. So I'm going to come down here to the fader for the kick and I'm going to right click on it. And just about any parameter in FL Studio that you can change, or a knob that you can move, or a slider, you can right click on it and automate it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the level of the kick. And as you'll see, it generated this automation clip. So now what I can do is I can take this end piece where it's staying. If you look at the hint bar, the value of this is 80%. And that is basically 100% on this mixer track. The reason why it's 80% here and 100% here is because you can actually go higher than 100. And so actually 100% in the playlist view would be this value. But since this is the default, it's 80%. So just hopefully that's not confusing. But basically I'm going to take this end point and I'm going to drop it down to 0. So what's going to happen is the level of the kick is going to drop slowly as the track plays until it reaches 0. And let's play the track and hear what that sounds like. That's one way you can kind of lead into a breakdown, for example. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this beginner's guide to FL Studio. I wanted to keep it simple and just sort of give you an overview of all the major features and components that you'll be using in your productions. If you have any questions or if anything was unclear, please let me know below in the comments. I'll be happy to help you. If you have any suggestions for future tutorial videos you'd like to see from me, please let me know as well. Otherwise, if you found this helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing because there'll be a lot more awesome tutorials to come. Yeah, anyway, thanks for watching and catch you in the next video.